way. That would be not very nice to you. So, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Mary, for having me. And today is going to be a little different. I was asked by special request to do what I call the half and half program. Well, first they said, well, could you do all gospel? And as much as I love gospel, but you know, if I do all gospel, they all start to sound, a lot of them sound very similar. So I like to do that the half and half program. So I'll tell you a story about half and half the milk. You know, this has nothing to do really with music, but it's just a silly story. So, when I was in school, there was this period in which I practiced more than 6 hours a day. And that sounds impressive, but it was not, because I wasn't really making much progress. Sometimes overdoing things doesn't help. So I would get very tired, and I started going to Walmart and buying these cases of half and half milk, and would just drink it by the glass. And it gave me a lot of energy. I was talking to my friend on the phone, and I said, you know, the secret to being able to practice for a long time is you just drink half and half milk. And it doesn't have that many calories, only 80 calories. And they said, what's the serving size? Oh, 1 teaspoon? Oops. So that's my half and half story. But to start with, I'd like to do a little improvising for you, but with this Southern gospel style, which I'll talk about. So this, you know, I like combining things that don't fit. So for example, trying to speak French with a very country Southern accent. Well, j'aime beaucoup la musique de Claude Debussy. So, you know, it's just fun to do that. And so if you give me, what are some classical melodies that you like from classical music that are famous?
Moonlight Sonata.
The Moonlight Sonata, okay. So, any others? I'm trying to think of. Did you say? Let's do that. Is that okay? Fur Elise is great, but I can't. The theme to the Fifth Symphony, you know. How to make that sound Southern gospel? Can I try it? I'm going to take some liberties with it. Like, it's not going to be in the minor key, it's going to be in the major. Oh, but he does do it in the major key later. So let's see how that goes. I don't know how it's going to go. So that had like a little bit of a Nashville gospel style from the 70s, maybe, I don't know. The 1970s, not the 1870s. So I'm not a historian, I'm not a scholar, so it's hard for me to talk about music in those terms. I talk about it more just like personally. So I've told you this a million times, it's almost like a joke, but it's true, that I have 2 immigrant parents, a mother from Russia, and it's through her that the classical music thing started. And then my dad, he's an immigrant too, in a way, from the southern part of Virginia. And so And I grew up in New Jersey, of all places, with these two foreign parents. And so through my mom, it was Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, you know, Russian, and any classical, these Beethoven, and then through my dad, it was, you know, Hank Williams Sr. and Roy Acuff, and all the greats, you know, from, you know, that music. And what is Southern gospel or gospel? What is it really? I don't exactly know how to define it, but I do know it's a melting pot, which is the best of American culture, I think, is the melting pot. So a lot of the melodies are from Europe, from England, or from whatnot. Like they're the old hymns from the Protestant church. And how does it become, well, Southern gospel? Okay, first of all, it's a geographic thing. That is the southeastern U.S., but it's that mixture or the addition of, so say, spirituals, African-American spirituals, come in and change those hymns. And then also some of the Scotch-Irish music, which is, they call it bluegrass now, but it's a very old, ancient type of music too. So when you have all of those things kind of mixing together, I guess that's, in a nutshell, what it is. So let's do a little experiment. I'm going to make you sing only one time, don't worry. I mean, unless you want to do it, but I think everyone knows the first verse to Amazing Grace. So I'll just show you how I'm going to take that and turn it into a Southern gospel type of thing. So if you wouldn't mind to just sing, I'm going to accompany you, but the first verse of Amazing Grace. And we're going to do it sort of in a straightforward manner, maybe the way it would be done, you know, in England in the early 1800s.
I'll give you a little introduction. Bravo to you. Beautiful, beautiful singing.
So you have some great voices here. I wish I could sing. Now that's, you know, pretty much straightforward. Of course, you know the story of him, John Newton. He was involved in the slave trade, and then he had this sort of conversion experience, and he realized how evil it was, and he wrote the words. The music is an old melody. I don't exactly know much about it, but that's the story of the hymn. So now I'm going to play it sort of, well, in this gospel style. And this is influenced a bit by Mahalia Jackson, who I admire so much. So Mahalia Jackson, this is kind of interesting because African-American spirituals in the 19th century, you know, in the times of slavery, were usually sung very slowly without much defined rhythm, a cappella, you know. And then the Great Migration changed the music a lot because, look, Mahalia Jackson was from New Orleans originally, but she spent most of her life in Chicago. People like her, they would take the trains and go up to these northern cities. And so that's when Chicago became sort of one of the epicenters of, well, Southern gospel music, African-American gospel music. I use all those terms interchangeably because I really don't know what's, you know, but, so I'm going to play Amazing Grace in that style, and there's a little bit of the influence of New Orleans, a little bit of the blues in there, although people like Mahalia Jackson would say, no, we did it first and the blues people copied us, but it doesn't matter because the music is just music, right? That's the beauty of it. You know, music doesn't have a nationality. At the end of the day, it's just human. So here it is. Thank you. And now, as far as half and half goes, I'm going to play you some shorter classical pieces. These are some. I don't think I've played some of these for you or any of them since we last met. I try to bring new things. So this is a famous piece, which before I even talk about it, I think again, even the idea of musical genre bugs me sometimes, because how do you say something is, what does classical mean really? Is it, what's Gregorian chant or Stravinsky? I mean, it's all called classical, but it's so different, and so many years apart. And this is something that's a piece you could even call it gospel if you wanted. This is Ave Maria by Franz Schubert. I'm not going to sing, I'm sorry, I can't. And the story of Ave Maria is, you've probably heard it sung. I mean, even Perry Como sang it. Most people sing it in Latin with the Hail Mary prayer as the text. But that's not how Schubert wrote it. He wrote it with a German language text, an excerpt from Sir Walter Scott's poem, The Lady of the Lake, translated into German. And that excerpt is a prayer to Mary, but it's not what you normally hear sung today. There's something to tell friends at dinner. Did you know? Really, I mean, it's a good thing to do. So, well, if you really want to make it work, start by asking them, what's the language of Ave Maria? And then you can, no, I'm just kidding, but now Schubert was born in 1797, died in 1828. He only lived to be 31. And in his short life, especially the last few years, which is when he wrote this, in 1825, it's the last 3 or 4 years, he knew that his time was limited, and he would write an enormous amount of music, sometimes 3 or 4 pieces in one day, especially his Lieder, German word for songs, for voice and piano. That was his specialty. And when he died, he was not only penniless, but he was completely unknown. And in many ways, Liszt is responsible for why we remember him. Liszt somehow came across his music after Schubert had died. And he, especially the Lieder, he arranged many of them, including this one, played them in his early recitals. Liszt was like a rock star. He was actually modeling himself on Paganini in the 1830s, 40s. But he brought fame to Schubert posthumously, really. Now what Liszt does, because the form of a lied or a song is that it has verses, it repeats. And then the singer will change the words. I mean, they'll sing different lyrics for verses, but a pianist, it's not like that because there's no words. So how do you create variety on the different verses? Well, here's Liszt's solution. He presents it in the beginning as it's originally written, But then verse 2 is a little different. So right-hand business, you know? That ain't Schubert. That's Liszt. He added that in. And he did it not to, you know, distort the music. It's because to make it a genuine piano piece, that's what you need to do. That's good translation in literature requires, you know, some embellishing to make it work in the new language. So here is Ave Maria as reimagined by Liszt. This is a little rocky, but it's okay. It fits with the whole Southern charm, right? The rocking chair and the sweet tea and the biscuits too. And as we call him down south, Franz Schubert. I'm sorry, the corny jokes just. Thank you. This is writing my cheat sheet. Sometimes I don't remember all the names of the gospel music composers. Some of those 19th century names can be hard to remember, like Reverend Cleveland Derricks or Elisha Hoffman. I mean, I guess I should remember those, but this is a song, a gospel song that's relatively recent compared to, Amazing Grace and other things. This is from the 1970s by a guy named Squire Parsons, who died back in May, so not that long ago, less than a year ago. And it's called Sweet Beulah Land. Maybe you've heard it. It sounds much older than it is. It sounds like one of these things that's been around for forever. Especially when you hear those mountain quartets or whatever, they sing it in that old time style. So this is a song that kind of wrote itself. I love these stories of the compositional process. So Squire Parsons taught high school in West Virginia, and when he was driving to school very early in the morning, high school teachers have to be there like very early. He would drive through the countryside, and the music just came to him. The words and the music just came to him. He'd get to his office and he'd just write down another measure or two, and it just wrote itself like that. So the term Beulah Land it's somewhere in the Old Testament. It refers to heaven, I think. It's only once or twice that they bring it up, but so that's what it's about. It's a beautiful song. I'm going to play it. I have a friend who's an amazing gospel singer. We've done some recording together. His name is Kent Dixon. And I have a story about him because he grew up in a rural area down east, and I gave a concert with some gospel on it. He called me up, and he has this amazing voice. He almost talks like George Jones. He has this rich accent. He says, "Robert, I need to tell you, I could hear your southern country upbringing in every note you played." I said, "Kent, I'm really sorry to tell you, I grew up in New Jersey." But my point is, the way he sings this is kind of the way I'm imitating how he sings it when I play it, because he sings it, it's amazing. So. classical. Let me think about this for a moment. How about I do Blessed Assurance? So Blessed Assurance is an old hymn. And by the way, I don't play a lot of the new music in general. I have very old-fashioned taste. And so the fact that I like playing that, I think it says something about that piece, that it sounds timeless to me. That's why I love it. So, but this is Blessed Assurance was written in 1873, almost 100 years before that. And of course, it's Fanny Crosby, who was a blind poet. And here's the story of it. Phoebe Palmer Knapp, these are the names that I can't remember. She was visiting Fanny Crosby and played this melody, just some of it, And Crosby, at the moment, came up with the lyrics to fit the music. I feel like usually it's the other way around. Somebody writes the words, and I'm not really sure, but in that case, it was just like an immediate thing. That's how brilliant Fanny Crosby was. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this in a style it's not an 1873 style, that's for sure. Inspired by a lot of the great gospel singers, in the African American church tradition, Aretha Franklin, Mahalia Jackson. That's kind of what I'm going to go for here. Again, I can't sing, but I can try to imitate it with this thing. And finally, I'll say, connecting Schubert and all of this. This was the thing about Schubert that stands out among other classical composers. Schubert had this natural melodic gift. It was like folk song just came from him, just emanated from him. And what is gospel music if not folk music? It's all kind of, so when you think about it, music, it's more similar than different, I think, at least. So, even though it's on different sides of the Atlantic Ocean. So here is Blessed Assurance, but in this different style I'm going to try it. So. So now, with some classical music, I'm going to play two pieces that I sort of like treat as one by Robert Schumann. The first is an early work of his, and the second is a late work. And the early work I've played for you, I think before, maybe once or twice. This is one of his Paganini studies from the 1830s. And this one is of, I would say, is of a manic character, because Schumann, well, first of all, he was like many of the romantics. He just was under the influence, under the spell, really, of Paganini in the 1830s. He heard him play, and he said, "That's it. I have to copy him, transfer what he's doing to the piano." Have you noticed that pianists like to be things that they're not? You know, like I always wish I could sing, like, or play the violin or something. It's never enough of the piano. But on the other hand, you can think of the piano as the beauty of the piano is it can like emulate all those things. You know, it's kind of an imitative instrument. That's how I see it. And you know, I like to imitate, so including accents. So now, yeah. So that's where the Paganini comes from. But Schumann himself, his character, I think, takes over this piece. It overshadows the Paganini. That's not a bad thing, because you know, Schumann had bipolar disorder, and I think that's in the music, so to speak, somehow. And he wrote many of his early pieces in an extended manic period. He said himself, in a white heat. And the original Paganini is like, which, by the way, is very similar to La Campanella, another piece by Paganini, which Liszt arranged. That's a bow exercise for the violinist, you know, alternating between different strings or whatnot. I don't play violins, I don't really know. But what Schumann does to it, adding some accompaniment to it, he turns it into, I call it a manic monologue. It sounds like somebody just talking breathlessly, which is what I've heard some people who have bipolar in a manic state, that's what will happen. And it's, you know, bipolar disorder, in those days, they didn't have treatments for it or anything. And, you know, it's somehow even today misunderstood. Many people with bipolar are absolutely brilliant people, as was Schumann. And we should, you know, appreciate that. And also, finally, in some circles, people say, well, you know, Schumann, his music is crazy. I don't like that, because he was not crazy. He had a condition. You know, Wagner and Stockhausen were crazy. And evil, as Wagner was. But, you know, Schumann was he's actually a wonderful person. I'll tell you about that in a bit. But he had this condition. But you do feel that sort of something unstable in his music, and I think that's the point. So here is one of his Paganini studies in B minor. character. This is a later piece by Schumann, and it's called Abendlied, from a set, evening song, from a set of pieces called Music for Children, Young and Old. And the theme of childhood became a prominent subject in his later music. So what happened is after Schumann did those Paganini arrangements, and he was in this manic period, part of the reason he was in the manic period was because he and a young lady named Clara Wieck, who was a genius pianist and composer, they wanted to get married, but her father, who was Schumann's piano teacher too, did not allow it. He said, this Robert Schumann guy is a crazy bohemian beatnik. I don't know if they had beatniks back then, but whatever. You can't marry him. But finally they got married, and I think, as happens to many people, he calmed down a lot when he got married. And he was a very good husband. He was a very good father to their 7 children. And I would tell you, that's what I mean by he had bipolar, he had a condition. He was a great person. He wasn't crazy, he had a condition. You heard about Wagner, and I don't feel bad to, if you love Wagner's music, that's fine, but I don't feel bad to talk bad about him as a person. In addition to being very racist and anti-Semitic, Wagner was also constantly cheating on his spouse. He was, I don't need to go into more detail, but I'm just contrasting that because Schumann was this really dedicated family man, and he viewed being a father as an adventure and reliving his own childhood. That's why he wrote so many childhood-themed pieces. It wasn't a chore for him. And I also thought about this because I read about it that, Schumann injured his hands, so he didn't really perform. I wonder what key that's in. F major. What do you think? Should I write? I don't know. Thank you. So, I like surprises. So anyway, Schumann, part of this was practical because Clara was much more well-known than him. She was famous, he wasn't. She was touring Europe, and he was, home with the kids. So he had a lot of time with the kids. And this, you've heard of Kindersingen, Scenes from Childhood, that he wrote, a masterpiece. And this set too. Now, I will say about this piece, it's originally for 4 hands piano, maybe intentionally to play with Clara. They played it together. This is an arrangement by Saint-Saëns for solo piano. The French have always loved Schumann because Schumann's music is very pictorial, or it's very unusual, and it's very visual, maybe you could say, and uses a lot of fantasy. And so the French really, they modeled, even early Debussy in some ways, modeled themselves on Schumann. So, about this music it's so calm. And it was also at this time that Schumann's health, his mental health, really started to deteriorate. He heard voices. He heard the note A ringing in his ears. He may have had lead poisoning, actually. A lot of his late music is in the key of A, like the piano concerto, So, unfortunately, he jumped into the Rhine River in February. And some fishermen rescued him, and he spent some time in an asylum. He died I think he was only 46 when he died. So it's just really terrible, but you might expect that the music he wrote around that time, like this piece, would be very unstable emotionally. But it's the opposite. It's eerily calm. Here's a quick story about eerily calm, because too calm is sometimes not good. I have a friend who's over 100 years old, served in Iwo Jima, and I saw him at a community where he lives, and this was around Christmas, around the holidays. And he was under the weather, but he was just not in good spirits. He was in that eerie calm mood, and he just, I don't have motivation, I don't feel good. And I was sad. But I saw him about 3 weeks ago, and he was so upbeat and back to his usual self. I said, "How are you doing? You look great." He said, "You're probably wondering what made me feel so much better." I said, "You know what?" He said, "This week I got into 3 arguments with people, and it brought me back." That's what I mean. Sometimes a little discord is good. And this music has like no discord. It's beautiful, and it's too calm, and there's a feeling of like resignation to it. So. Back to some gospel, just a little comment on some music theory nerd stuff. By the way, music theory shouldn't intimidate you, because music theory is what happens after a piece is written. People go and study how it was done, and then they come up with music theory. So it's not like the other way around. Some people think, oh, I need to know theory before I know music. No. So there's such a thing as a chord. It's basically a combination of several notes that sounds good, or not, but there's a chord, right? So take the Sweet Beulah Land. What the really beautiful parts are the notes that don't belong to the chord, like and then resolves down. And it's the same with, that's what Schumann does in that piece. That's why it sounds so heart-wrenching, because you have all these like. So, anyway, just a little thought about that. I want to play now a song, a gospel song, Where Could I Go But to the Lord? It's a famous, song, and it's from 1940 by J.B. Coates. The story of it is, so he was having a conversation with a neighbor who was dying, and the neighbor's name was Joe Keys. And he just said that phrase, where could I go but to the Lord? And J.B. Coates was so impressed by that line. He wrote the song, or the song wrote itself. And I'm going to do this kind of in a Mahalia Jackson style. So, Elvis sang this. And Elvis, who did he consider his mentor for gospel music? Well, it was Mahalia Jackson, of course. So here is the piece. Trying to make it as half and half as possible. So here's another gospel song, Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. Maybe should I do that one or another one? I mean, they're all, I like playing them all. Did I play? I feel like I played that here not that long ago. So how about I do another one that's similar, The Unclouded Day, because except for the pollen, it is. 1881 by Reverend Josiah Kelly Allwood. That's what I needed from this. Hard to remember that name for me. So he was a preacher and he lived in Ohio and went to visit his friend in Michigan from divinity school. And they ended up having an argument about theology until very late at night. And it was like 1 a.m. or something. So Josiah Kelly Allwood got into his horse carriage to go back to Ohio. I mean, it wasn't like that far. And he fell asleep. By the way, people talk about driverless cars. Wasn't that a solution right there? Just go back. But anyway, so he fell asleep, and he woke up and he looked at the sky. It was there was clear sky. And he just wrote, the song just came to him, Unclouded Day. I love this story. So I don't know who won the debate though, or what it was about even, but. So I'm gonna play this is the kind of music that my dad likes, Told you about my dad, he's an immigrant from Southern Virginia, grew up in New Jersey. Now they live in the faraway land of Chapel Hill, my parents. And to my mother's great horror, he will go do these gigs. He plays, old time, bluegrass, gospel and all that stuff. And he had a gig, this was a few years ago, but I was even amazed, at the Squirrel Hunting Club of Chatham County. Yeah, but he said that, it was just like his childhood, so this is the kind of music, it was not like mine though. Yeah, here is in that style, I guess, maybe how he would have done it there. And now, a piece by a classical composer who in many ways was kind of like a gospel composer. I don't know, Franz Liszt. I'll tell you what I mean by that. So, have I told you the story about Jerry Lee Lewis at the Waxahachie Bible College in Texas? Okay, well, I think that's how you pronounce it. I actually lived in Texas for a while, and that also influenced some of the gospel style I have, so some of that in there too. So Jerry Lee Lewis, who was a great gospel musician, but he played in this, let's say, very Louisiana style with some wildness to it, to say the least. And he was going to be a preacher. His cousin was Jimmy Swaggart. They were related. So I guess they were kind of similar. But so anyway, he was there, and there was like the headmaster or whatever wasn't there yet, so they were in the chapel, and he sat down and started playing this old gospel song called "My God Is Real," but he did like. And the director of the school walked in while this was happening, tapped him on the shoulder, said, "You're expelled, get out." In the 50s. The same thing happened to Franz Liszt. Liszt wanted to be a priest. And he had this devout religious streak to him. And he was, born in the countryside of Hungary. I guess not too different from being from Louisiana or whatnot. And he had this deeply religious, and when his father was dying, when he was a young, teenager, he told his father, I want to be a priest, I don't want to be a musician. His father said, do not do that. But anyway, in his later years, he was practically living in the Vatican. He would wear the priest's collar. And he went to the Sistine Chapel to be ordained. This is a true story. And there was a piano there, unfortunately, for him. And he sat down and started improvising, and apparently, I don't know if this, I think it's true, there was a group of nuns, and they fainted. Not good. So the cardinal came to him and said, this is not going to work. You better get out. So, but this is not, I know it's a funny story, but Liszt had this tension, because he also had the whole wine, women, and song thing, but he had a devoutly religious side to him. And this is a piece of his that's relatively calm for Liszt, and it's the Consolation number 3. The word consolation, consolation, comes from a cycle of poems by Alphonse de Lamartine, who was a poet at that time. And these are very introverted works, 1849, 1850. He wrote them after his friend, colleague, and somewhat rival, Chopin, died. And this is in Chopin's style. It sounds like Chopin. I think this is his tribute to Chopin. So I'll play this, and I'm looking at the time, then maybe one more upbeat gospel. We'll call it a day. I don't want to make you late anywhere. So here is Liszt. I just learned this piece. It's a very familiar piece, but it's something I wanted to play for you. so this is a gospel song. Yes, here it is. 1937 by Reverend Cleveland Derricks. You don't have that name too much nowadays. Cleavant. Sounds like Cleveland. This is just a little talk with Jesus. It's an old gospel song. And it's from the Great Depression period. And this is from the Stamps Baxter School of Music. There were these singing schools all around the South. Stamps Baxter and publishing companies. And that's a style of music. Actually, the Unclouded Day I did kind of in a Stamps Baxter style. So here is just a little talk with Jesus.
Oh, yes, I forgot to mention. Let me cut
This thing